They threw a pregnant widow into the snow, but the Duke's next decision shocked everyone. Winter arrived early that year, draping the English countryside in a white silence that seemed almost holy from a distance. Yet beneath that blanket of snow, hearts remained as cold and merciless as the season itself. On the final evening of November, the Whitmore estate glowed with candlelight, its towering windows casting golden reflections across the frozen grounds. Carriages lined the drive, their wheels crunching over frost, while guests gathered inside for what appeared to be a respectable family assembly. Few among them knew they were about to witness a cruelty that would haunt their memories for years. Lady Eleanor Whitmore stood alone beside a marble fireplace in the drawing room, one hand resting protectively upon the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. At 24, she possessed a quiet beauty that grief had only sharpened. Her dark hair was arranged with careful simplicity, and her pale blue gown could not disguise the exhaustion that shadowed her face. 8 months had passed since her husband, Lord Henry Whitmore, had succumbed to a sudden fever, yet sorrow still lingered in her eyes like a permanent winter. The conversations around her softened whenever she approached and resumed the moment she passed. Whispers drifted through the room like poisonous smoke. There is something suspicious about the timing. She has always been too ambitious. Can anyone truly be certain the child is Henry's? Each murmur landed like a stone against her dignity. Eleanor heard enough to understand their meaning. The accusations no longer shocked her. Since her husband's death, every act of kindness she offered had been recast as manipulation, every tear interpreted as performance. She had become a convenient villain in a story others preferred to believe. At the far end of the room sat Lady Agatha Whitmore, Henry's mother. Age had not softened her features. She watched Eleanor with the expression of a judge already convinced of guilt. Beside her stood several relatives eager to secure their influence over the family inheritance. The unborn child complicated their ambitions. If the baby were born healthy, a legitimate heir would stand between them and the wealth they coveted. That truth hid beneath every insult. Eleanor understood it. Perhaps that was why she remained silent. She still believed dignity was stronger than desperation. A servant announced dinner, but before anyone could move, Lady Agatha rose from her chair. The room quieted instantly. "I have tolerated this farce long enough," she declared. Every gaze turned toward Eleanor. The young widow felt her pulse quicken. "Mother," one relative said cautiously, though his smile betrayed anticipation. Lady Agatha ignored him. "My son lies in his grave, and yet this woman continues to exploit his name." A murmur swept through the guests. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "My lady," she replied carefully, "I have done nothing except mourn my husband and carry his child." The older woman's eyes hardened. His child? The question struck harder than a slap. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others leaned forward with eager fascination. Eleanor felt heat rising beneath her skin. "You insult not only me," she said quietly, "but your own grandson. My grandson requires proof before he receives recognition." The words hung in the air. A few women gasped. Others lowered their eyes. No one defended her. Not one voice challenged the accusation. In that moment, Eleanor understood something painful. The room was filled with people who valued reputation more than truth. They would watch injustice unfold so long as it entertained them. She placed both hands over her stomach. The child shifted gently beneath her touch. That tiny movement strengthened her resolve. "You may think whatever you wish of me," she said, "but I will not permit you to shame my husband's memory." Lady Agatha's face darkened. "You presume to lecture me beneath my own roof?" "No," Eleanor answered. "I merely ask for fairness." The request only fueled the older woman's fury. "Fairness?" she repeated. "You arrived here with nothing. You married into privilege. Now you expect sympathy as well?" The guests remained silent. Outside, wind battered the windows. Inside, the atmosphere tightened like a noose. Lady Agatha lifted her chin. "Enough. You are no longer welcome in this house." For a heartbeat, Eleanor thought she had misheard. Then servants stepped forward. The truth became impossible to deny. Shock rippled through the gathering. Yet even now no one objected. "Please," one elderly guest whispered, "the weather?" "I have made my decision," Lady Agatha said coldly. Eleanor stared at the faces surrounding her. Some looked embarrassed. Others appeared relieved. A few seemed entertained. None offered refuge. None offered courage. The humiliation cut deeper than the winter wind waiting beyond the doors. Slowly she gathered what remained of her pride. "If this is your wish," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts, Then I shall go. Minutes later the great front doors opened. A violent gust of snow swept inside. Servants placed her small travel case upon the icy steps. Then the doors closed behind her. The sound echoed like a sentence being passed. Eleanor stood alone beneath the storm-dark sky. Snow gathered upon her hair and shoulders. The cold bit through her gown almost instantly. She took several unsteady steps toward the estate gates. Each movement demanded strength she no longer possessed. The child within her seemed suddenly fragile. The road blurred before her eyes. By the time she reached the iron gates, her knees buckled. She fell into the snow as distant figures watched from windows glowing with warm light. Then, through the swirling storm, another sound emerged. The steady approach of carriage wheels. A black carriage appeared from the white darkness and slowed beside the fallen widow. Moments later the door opened. A tall gentleman stepped down, his dark coat whipping in the wind. He looked first at Eleanor, then toward the illuminated mansion behind her. The expression that crossed his face was not pity. It was something far more dangerous. Judgment. The wind howled across the estate grounds, carrying snow through the darkness like scattered ashes. Yet Duke Sebastian Ashford remained unmoving beside the fallen widow. The lantern hanging from his carriage cast a warm circle of light over the frozen road, illuminating Eleanor's pale face and trembling form. For several seconds neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless horses and the storm that raged around them. Sebastian had witnessed many forms of cruelty in his 34 years. He had seen soldiers abandoned after war, tenants forgotten by wealthy landlords, and ambitious men sacrifice honor for advantage. Yet something about the sight before him stirred an anger he rarely permitted himself to feel. A pregnant woman had been discarded into the snow by people who called themselves family. He removed his heavy wool coat without hesitation and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. The warmth enveloped her instantly. She looked up, startled. The Duke's features were stern and composed, his dark hair touched with snow, his expression carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "My lord," she whispered, "you should not trouble yourself." His gaze shifted briefly toward the brightly lit mansion behind her. "I believe the trouble began before my arrival." Color touched her cheeks despite the cold. Humiliation lingered within her, refusing to loosen its grip. "I thank you for your kindness." "This is not kindness," he replied. "It is simple decency." The distinction struck her more deeply than he intended. Moments later, Sebastian helped her into the carriage. The interior glowed with lamplight and smelled faintly of leather and cedar. As the vehicle turned away from Whitmore Estate, Eleanor watched the familiar house disappear behind the storm. The sight should have filled her with grief. Instead, she felt only exhaustion. For the first time in months, she no longer needed to stand alone. The journey to Ashford Manor lasted several hours. Throughout the ride, Sebastian asked few questions. His restraint surprised her. Most people demanded explanations. Most wanted gossip. Most wished to hear a tragedy they could repeat later at dinner parties. The Duke merely ensured she was warm and comfortable. That silence earned more trust than 100 sympathetic speeches. By dawn they arrived at Ashford Manor. The estate emerged from the snowy landscape like something from an old fairy tale. Tall stone walls rose above immaculate gardens sleeping beneath winter frost. Towering windows reflected the pale morning sky. Smoke curled gently from dozens of chimneys. Eleanor stared in disbelief. The house seemed impossibly grand. Sebastian noticed her expression. "It is only a building." She glanced toward him. "It is considerably more impressive than most buildings." The faintest trace of amusement touched his face. The expression vanished almost immediately, yet she had seen it. For reasons she could not explain, the moment lingered. The household servants greeted their master with practiced efficiency. Yet when they noticed the exhausted pregnant widow beside him, curiosity flickered through the ranks. Sebastian addressed them before speculation could begin. "Lady Eleanor Whitmore is our honored guest. She will be treated with every courtesy afforded to my own family." The instruction was calm. No one dared question it. Within hours, Eleanor was settled into a comfortable suite overlooking snow-covered gardens. A fire crackled in the hearth. Fresh flowers brightened the room despite the season. Warm tea awaited her beside the window. The care moved her more than luxury itself. Someone had considered her comfort. Someone had expected her arrival. Someone had prepared a place for her. That realization nearly brought tears. Meanwhile, beyond Ashford Manor, society awakened to scandal. News traveled faster than winter winds. By the end of the week, drawing rooms throughout London buzzed with speculation. Why had the Duke rescued a disgraced widow? Why had he brought her into his home? Why was he risking his reputation for a woman abandoned by her own family? The answers multiplied with each retelling. Some claimed he had loved Eleanor secretly for years. Others suggested the unborn child belonged to him. A few insisted marriage was already being arranged. None possessed evidence. Evidence was unnecessary. Scandal thrived on imagination. Letters arrived daily at Ashford Manor. Some expressed concern. Others offered warnings. Several were openly hostile. Sebastian ignored most of them. His indifference only fueled further gossip. Eleanor learned of the rumors gradually. Each whisper reopened wounds she struggled to heal. She considered leaving more than once. Yet every attempt ended the same way. Where would she go? Who would shelter her? The child needed safety. Her pride could not outweigh that responsibility. One snowy afternoon, several weeks after her arrival, a servant informed her that the Duke wished to see her in the library. The room was magnificent. Towering shelves stretched toward painted ceilings. Firelight danced across polished wood and leather-bound volumes. The scent of old paper mingled with cedar logs burning in the hearth. Sebastian stood beside a table. In his hands rested a small carved box. As Eleanor approached, he extended it toward her. She hesitated. "My lord. It belonged to my mother." Surprise flashed across her face. She accepted the gift carefully. The polished walnut box opened to reveal an exquisite music mechanism adorned with delicate silver roses. When she wound the key, a gentle melody filled the room. Soft notes drifted through the air like memories made audible. Eleanor's eyes glistened. "It is beautiful. My mother treasured it. Then I cannot possibly accept." "You can." The certainty in his voice silenced her protest. For several moments she listened to the melody. Something inside her eased. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to remember that kindness still existed. Enough to remember she remained worthy of receiving it. Days later, another invitation arrived. This one came from the organizers of a prestigious royal charity ball. Eleanor assumed it was addressed solely to the Duke. Then she noticed her own name written beneath his. Shock swept through her. She looked toward Sebastian across the drawing room. Surely there had been a mistake. He met her gaze calmly. There has been no error. The realization struck like lightning. Attending the ball beside him would place her directly before the judgment of society. It would ignite every rumor already spreading through London. It would be an unmistakable declaration of protection. Eleanor's heart raced. "Do you understand what people will say?" His answer came without hesitation. "They are already speaking." Outside, snow drifted silently beyond the windows, but inside the room, something shifted forever. For the first time since being cast into the storm, Eleanor realized the Duke was not merely offering shelter. He was choosing, deliberately and publicly, to stand beside her. And as the music box played its final trembling notes, she began to suspect that the greatest scandal was still waiting to unfold. The royal charity ball glittered beneath 1,000 candles, transforming the grand hall into a sea of gold and crystal. Chandeliers sparkled overhead like captured stars, while polished marble reflected the movement of silk gowns and black evening coats. Music drifted from the orchestra gallery, elegant and refined, yet beneath the beauty lingered a sharper current. Anticipation moved through the crowd in whispers and sidelong glances. Everyone knew the Duke of Ashford was attending. More importantly, everyone knew he was bringing Lady Eleanor Whitmore. The moment their carriage arrived, conversation faltered. Eleanor stepped into the brilliant light with measured composure, though her heart beat painfully against her ribs. Her silver-blue gown had been chosen for simplicity rather than extravagance. The unborn child beneath her dress remained discreetly hidden, but impossible to ignore. She felt every gaze settle upon her before she even reached the entrance. Beside her, Sebastian offered his arm. His expression remained calm. His presence felt immovable. Together they entered the ballroom. The reaction was immediate. Fans paused midway through elegant gestures. Gentlemen interrupted conversations. Ladies exchanged astonished looks behind jeweled masks of politeness. Eleanor recognized several faces from previous seasons. Once they had welcomed her warmly. Now many turned away. Others stared openly. The rejection should have wounded her less after months of enduring it. Instead, it hurt precisely because it remained familiar. A young countess whispered something to her companion. Both women laughed. An older gentleman shook his head disapprovingly. Another watched Sebastian with visible confusion. No one approached. No one offered greeting. The ballroom itself seemed determined to isolate her. Yet Sebastian never released her arm. When the orchestra began the next waltz, he turned toward her. "May I have this dance, Lady Eleanor?" Several nearby guests visibly stiffened. She stared at him. "My lord, perhaps you should not." His dark eyes held hers steadily. That was not an instruction. It was a request. A flicker of warmth touched her despite the surrounding hostility. Slowly she placed her hand in his. The movement triggered a ripple of shock across the room. They stepped onto the dance floor. The music swelled. Couples rotated around them beneath rivers of candlelight. For a few moments Eleanor concentrated solely upon the dance. Sebastian guided her effortlessly, maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring her comfort. Every movement reflected careful consideration. He never treated her as fragile. He never forgot her condition. The balance impressed her. Finally she gathered enough courage to ask the question that had haunted her for weeks. "Why did you help me?" His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "You required assistance. Many people witnessed what happened. Many people failed to act." The answer did not satisfy her. She studied him quietly. "You risked your reputation. I can survive gossip." "You risked more than gossip." For a moment he remained silent. The orchestra continued around them. The glittering crowd blurred into the background. At last he spoke. "Some things deserve protection regardless of cost." The words lingered between them. Before she could respond, the dance ended. Applause echoed lightly through the ballroom. The spell shattered. Society returned. Whispers followed them throughout the evening. Yet something had changed. The hostility still existed. The judgment remained. But for the first time, Eleanor sensed that Sebastian's actions stemmed from something deeper than obligation. The realization unsettled her more than the scandal itself. Winter deepened over the following weeks. Snow blanketed the gardens surrounding Ashford Manor. The world beyond the estate seemed distant, muffled beneath frost and silence. Within those walls, an unexpected companionship gradually emerged. Evenings often found them in the library. Firelight danced across shelves crowded with books. The familiar music box rested upon a nearby table. Sometimes they discussed literature. Sometimes history. Sometimes nothing important at all. The ordinary nature of those conversations became precious. Eleanor had spent months defending herself. With Sebastian, she found herself simply speaking. One evening she paused beside a window overlooking the frozen gardens. The moonlight painted silver paths across the snow. "My husband loved winter," she said softly. Sebastian looked up from his book. She rarely mentioned Henry. The admission carried weight. He believed every snowfall made the world appear new. Pain touched her smile. "I miss him." The confession hung in the quiet room. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Simply true. Sebastian closed his book. "You loved him very much." "I did." The answer came without hesitation. Many expected widows to rewrite history, to exaggerate faults, to distance themselves from grief. Eleanor never had. "He was kind," she continued. "Not perfect. Not extraordinary. Simply kind. That was enough." A silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Then her expression darkened. "What frightens me is not raising this child alone." Sebastian listened carefully. "What frightens me is that my child may inherit the shame others attach to me." The vulnerability in her voice pierced him. 4 months he had watched her endure cruelty with remarkable composure. Yet beneath that dignity lived fear. Fear for someone who had not even entered the world. "No child inherits shame," he said quietly. "Society often disagrees. Society is frequently wrong." Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Something dangerous. Neither acknowledged it. Neither dared. The weeks continued. The bond strengthened. Neither named it. Then one bitter evening, the fragile peace shattered. Eleanor collapsed while descending the staircase. Pain seized her without warning. Servants rushed forward. Panic swept through the household. The physician was summoned immediately. Sebastian arrived moments later and found chaos waiting. The sight of Eleanor struggling for breath sent a cold terror through him unlike anything he had experienced in years. The physician ordered everyone from the room. Hours crawled by. Snow battered the windows. Candles burned low. Servants moved quietly through darkened corridors. Yet Sebastian remained outside her chamber. He refused food. He refused rest. He sat alone beside the door, listening for every sound within. Each passing minute deepened the realization he had been avoiding. This was no longer duty. No longer charity. No longer simple protection. Near dawn the physician finally emerged. "The danger has passed," he said. Relief struck with such force that Sebastian briefly closed his eyes. Exhaustion followed. Eventually he sank into a nearby chair. Sleep claimed him there. When morning arrived, Eleanor awoke weak but stable. The room felt peaceful. The crisis had passed. Curious, she glanced toward the doorway. There, just beyond the threshold, sat Sebastian Ashford. His head rested against the chair. His posture remained awkward from hours of waiting. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke appeared entirely defenseless. And as she watched him sleeping outside her door, Eleanor realized a truth far more frightening than scandal. The man who had rescued her from the snow was no longer guarding her out of principle alone, and the discovery stirred feelings she was no longer certain she could hide. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ashford Manor, washing the corridors in pale gold, yet the peace that followed Eleanor's recovery proved painfully brief. News of her illness had remained private, but the rumors surrounding her presence at the Duke's estate continued to spread with relentless force. London society possessed an insatiable appetite for scandal, and every week seemed to produce a fresh variation of the same story. Some claimed she had already secured the Duke's affection. Others insisted a secret engagement was imminent. The cruelest voices suggested she had deliberately manipulated her circumstances to gain sympathy and position. Eleanor endured the gossip as she had endured everything else, with quiet dignity. Yet even dignity had limits. One snowy afternoon, a solicitor arrived carrying documents sealed with the Whitmore family crest. The sight alone filled Eleanor with dread. She sat opposite Sebastian in the library as the man explained the purpose of his visit. The challenge was formal. Lord Henry's relatives intended to contest the inheritance rights of her unborn child. Their accusation was simple. If Eleanor's reputation could be destroyed publicly, questions regarding the child's legitimacy would inevitably follow. If doubt prevailed, the Whitmore fortune would pass elsewhere. The scheme was as transparent as it was vicious. When the solicitor departed, silence settled heavily over the room. Eleanor stared into the fire. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she laughed softly. The sound carried no amusement. "They will never stop." Sebastian watched her carefully. "No. They threw me from their home." "Yes. They slander me at every opportunity." "They do." Her eyes glistened. "And now they wish to steal my child's future." The pain beneath her composure finally surfaced. Not for herself. For the baby she carried. That realization stirred something fierce within Sebastian. His expression hardened. "They will fail." She looked toward him. The certainty in his voice startled her. "You cannot know that." "I do." "How?" "Because they are counting upon your silence." A faint spark appeared behind his eyes. "And they are counting upon mine." For the first time since receiving the documents, Eleanor felt hope. Dangerous hope. The kind capable of breaking hearts. Days later, invitations circulated throughout aristocratic circles. A gathering had been arranged. Influential nobles, political figures, and members of prominent families would attend. Officially, the event existed to address concerns regarding inheritance and reputation. Unofficially, it promised entertainment. Society loved nothing more than witnessing a public disgrace. The evening arrived beneath a sky heavy with snow. The grand assembly hall blazed with candlelight. Dozens of distinguished guests filled the room. The atmosphere resembled a courtroom disguised as a social event. Every conversation stopped when Eleanor entered beside Sebastian. Whispers followed immediately. She held her head high despite the knot tightening within her chest. The challenge would come. She knew it. The only uncertainty involved how cruel it would be. The answer arrived quickly. One of Henry's cousins stepped forward. A polished gentleman with an ambitious smile. He bowed formally before addressing the gathering. His words sounded respectful. Their purpose was not. He questioned Eleanor's character. He questioned her motives. He questioned her relationship with the Duke. Each accusation wore the clothing of civility while carrying the venom of slander. The crowd listened attentively. No one interrupted. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of judgment settling upon her shoulders. Months earlier such scrutiny might have shattered her. Now she merely felt tired. When the man finally finished, another relative rose. Then another. Each added fresh insinuations. Each attempted to erode her credibility. The attack continued until silence returned once more. Every eye turned toward Eleanor. Waiting. Expecting defense. Demanding explanation. Slowly she rose. The room remained utterly still. I have spent months listening to rumors about myself, she said quietly. Her voice carried farther than she expected. I have been called manipulative, dishonest, and opportunistic. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. She continued. I buried my husband. The simple statement cut through the room. I lost my home. Another pause. I lost my reputation. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth possessed a power gossip could never imitate. The only thing I have fought to protect is my child. Emotion trembled beneath her words. Not weakness. Conviction. If that devotion is considered a crime, then I confess myself guilty. Silence followed. A deeper silence than before. For a moment she believed her words might actually matter. Then someone laughed softly. The sound shattered everything. Several others exchanged skeptical looks. The old prejudices remained intact. Reason alone would not change them. Eleanor felt her heart sink. And then Sebastian stood. The movement itself commanded attention. The room seemed to straighten around him. Power did not merely accompany the Duke of Ashford. It obeyed him. His gaze swept across the assembly. Every whisper vanished. Every smile disappeared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet force of thunder. You claim concern for honor. No one interrupted. You speak endlessly of lineage, reputation, and propriety. His eyes settled upon Henry's relatives. And yet you cast a pregnant widow into the snow. The word struck like a blow. Several faces paled immediately. Others looked away. Sebastian continued. The measure of nobility is not found in bloodlines. Each sentence landed with devastating precision. It is found in character. No one dared challenge him. It is found in courage. The silence deepened. And it is found in the willingness to protect those whom society finds convenient to abandon. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not disagreement. Recognition. For the first time the balance had shifted. The accusations suddenly appeared ugly. The cruelty suddenly appeared undeniable. The relatives who had arrived expecting victory found themselves shrinking beneath public scrutiny. Sebastian stepped closer to Eleanor. The gesture was simple. Its meaning was unmistakable. He stood beside her. Openly. Unapologetically. The gathering ended soon afterward. Conversations erupted throughout the hall. Yet the tone had changed entirely. People no longer questioned Eleanor. They questioned her accusers. Outside, snow drifted softly across the manor gardens as Sebastian and Eleanor escaped the crowd. Moonlight silvered the frozen landscape, transforming every tree into crystal sculpture. For several moments they walked in silence. Then he stopped. His eyes found hers. Everything else seemed to fade away. I offered you shelter because it was right, he said quietly. Her breath caught. I remained because I admired your strength. The world narrowed to the space between them. Snowflakes drifted through the cold air. His voice softened. And somewhere along the way, admiration became something far more dangerous. Emotion flooded her chest. Months of loneliness. Months of grief. Months of guarded hope. All of it collided at once. I cannot imagine my future without you, Eleanor. Tears filled her eyes. Not from sorrow. From relief. From wonder. From the terrifying possibility of happiness. She opened her mouth to answer. At that exact moment, a sharp pain seized her. Her hand flew instinctively to her stomach. Another followed. Stronger. The color drained from Sebastian's face. Their eyes locked. The realization arrived simultaneously. The child was coming. The journey back to Ashford Manor unfolded in a blur of fear, urgency, and falling snow. The carriage raced through the winter night while the horses strained against the storm. Inside, Eleanor fought to remain calm as waves of pain tightened around her body. Each contraction stole her breath and reminded her that the child she had protected through months of grief, humiliation, and uncertainty had finally chosen this moment to enter the world. Sebastian sat opposite her, his composure fractured for the first time since she had met him. He had faced political rivals, financial crises, and public scandals without visible hesitation. None of those battles had prepared him for this. Each time Eleanor winced, something twisted painfully within him. He wanted to help. He wanted to take away her suffering. Instead, he could only remain beside her. Look at me, he said quietly when another contraction passed. Her eyes found his. You are stronger than anyone I have ever known. Despite the pain, a faint smile touched her lips. The carriage finally reached Ashford Manor. Servants rushed forward immediately. The household physician had already been summoned. Within moments Eleanor disappeared into her chamber while doctors, nurses, and attendants hurried through corridors illuminated by flickering candlelight. Then the waiting began. Hours passed. The storm intensified outside. Wind battered the windows. Snow swirled across the dark grounds. Inside the manor, tension settled over every room. Even the servants seemed to move more quietly. No one wished to disturb the fragile battle unfolding upstairs. Sebastian remained outside Eleanor's chamber. He paced. He sat. He stood again. Time lost meaning. Several times the physician emerged only to offer brief updates before returning inside. The labor was difficult. The child was struggling. Eleanor was exhausted. Each report deepened the knot of dread growing within him. Near midnight, he wandered into the deserted chapel adjoining the manor. The room was illuminated by only a handful of candles. Their soft light flickered across stone walls and stained glass. Sebastian lowered his head. He had not prayed in years. Too many disappointments had eroded his faith. Too many losses had convinced him that prayers often went unanswered. Yet now words came anyway. Not polished words. Not noble words. Simply honest ones. For the first time in years, he admitted how much Eleanor meant to him. Not to God. To himself. The realization struck with startling clarity. He loved her. Not because she needed protection. Not because she inspired admiration. Not because she awakened his guilt over past failures. He loved her because she possessed courage when the world rewarded cruelty. Because she carried sorrow without allowing it to poison her heart. Because she had transformed a lonely house into a home merely by existing within it. The truth left him shaken. He returned to the corridor outside her chamber shortly afterward. The waiting continued. Hour after hour. Then just before dawn, a cry pierced the silence. The sound stopped everyone. A baby's cry. Small. Fragile. Alive. For one suspended moment nobody moved. Then the chamber door opened. The physician stepped into the hallway. Exhaustion lined his face. Relief softened his expression. Congratulations, Your Grace. Sebastian felt his breath catch. The child? Healthy. His voice faltered. And Lady Eleanor? A smile appeared. She is resting. The tension that had gripped him for hours finally shattered. Relief swept through him so powerfully that he briefly closed his eyes. The battle was over. Both had survived. Moments later he entered the room. Morning light crept through the curtains, washing the chamber in pale gold. Eleanor rested against pillows, exhausted but peaceful. In her arms lay a tiny infant wrapped in blankets. The sight rooted Sebastian to the spot. Everything else faded. The scandals, the gossip, the endless judgment. None of it mattered. Only this. Eleanor looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for several seconds. Words seemed inadequate. Finally she smiled. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Would you like to meet him? She whispered. The son. Sebastian approached slowly. When Eleanor placed the child into his arms, something shifted forever inside him. The infant's tiny fingers curled instinctively. Trusting. Innocent. Completely unaware of the battles fought on his behalf. Emotion tightened Sebastian's throat. He had spent years believing his life was complete. In that moment he understood how empty it had truly been. Days later, news of the birth spread rapidly throughout society. Once again drawing rooms buzzed with conversation. Many expected the Duke's involvement to end now that the crisis had passed. Some believed Eleanor would quietly establish her own household. Others assumed the relationship had merely been an act of temporary generosity. The speculation continued until Sebastian ended it himself. A formal reception was announced at Ashford Manor. Invitations were delivered across London. The event attracted noble families, political leaders, social elites, and countless curious observers. Everyone arrived expecting answers. What they received exceeded every expectation. The grand ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Music drifted softly through the hall. Guests filled every corner. Whispers flowed like rivers beneath polished conversation. Then the doors opened. Silence descended immediately. Eleanor entered wearing a gown of ivory silk. Months earlier she had walked into a ballroom burdened by scandal and suspicion. Now she carried herself with quiet confidence. In her arms rested her son. Beside her stood Sebastian. Together they crossed the room. No one looked away. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The widow once abandoned in the snow now stood at the center of the most powerful gathering in England. When they reached the front of the hall, Sebastian turned toward the assembled crowd. His voice carried effortlessly through the silence. Several months ago, Lady Eleanor Whitmore entered my home as a guest. Every person listened. She arrived after being cast aside by those who should have protected her. A few faces visibly reddened. Others lowered their eyes. Sebastian continued. Since then I have witnessed her courage, her dignity, and her devotion as a mother. His gaze shifted toward Eleanor. Warmth softened his expression. For the first time, society saw not a powerful duke addressing a crowd. They saw a man speaking from his heart. I have also discovered that my happiness is inseparable from hers. The room became perfectly still. Even breathing seemed to stop. Then came the words that would be repeated across England for years. Lady Eleanor Whitmore entered my house as a guest. She stands beside me today as the woman I intend to marry. Shock erupted throughout the ballroom. Gasps echoed beneath the chandeliers. Several guests stared in disbelief. Others smiled openly. A few even applauded. The scandal that had consumed society for months dissolved in an instant. Because Sebastian was not asking permission. He was making a declaration. He turned fully toward Eleanor. Emotion shimmered in her eyes. Not long ago she had believed her future ended at the gates of Whitmore Estate. Now an entirely different future stood before her. One built not upon pity, not upon obligation, but upon love. Lady Eleanor, he said softly, though everyone heard him, will you honor me by becoming my wife? Tears slipped down her cheeks. She glanced at the child sleeping peacefully in her arms. Then she looked at the man who had found her abandoned in the snow and refused to leave her there. The answer lived in her heart long before the question was asked. Yes, she whispered. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Months later, spring arrived. The snow vanished. Gardens bloomed. Sunlight replaced storms. Laughter echoed through Ashford Manor where silence once ruled. Eleanor and Sebastian were married beneath flowering trees, surrounded by those who genuinely cared for them. Their son thrived, cherished beyond measure. As for the relatives who had cast her out, their cruelty became their legacy. Society eventually forgot their titles but remembered their shame. Yet it remembered something else as well. It remembered the winter night when a pregnant widow was abandoned to the storm. It remembered the duke who stopped his carriage and chose compassion over convenience. Most of all, it remembered that the greatest love stories rarely begin in ballrooms or palaces. Sometimes they begin in the snow, when one lonely soul refuses to leave another behind. And from that single act of courage, two broken lives became one extraordinary future, proving that Eleanor was never abandoned by fate, only guided toward the place where she would finally belong.